All right, hello, everybody. This is GPNC Naturalist Allan here, and I am continuing with our theme of birds for the week by talking about one of my favorite birds, which are corvids, and that's a large group of birds that includes a lot of different species. It includes crows, ravens, jays, jackdaws, magpies, all sorts of stuff. These are really cool birds, though, because they have really unique intelligence. Okay, that's one of the things that they're most well known for is their brains. So we're going to delve into that a little bit and talk about what makes them so intelligent and some of the crazy things that they can do with their bird brains. All right, so most crow species look kind of somewhat like this, right? We have in the Great Plains, we have the American crow. That's the one that's we're most likely to find. We there are 45 different species of crow in the world, though, so it's actually quite a big group. They all have similar black plumage. Some of them have a little bit of white. Some of them have a little bit of brown. Some of them have different sized bills. Some of them have a little bit of like ruffly feathers. Some kind of like looks almost like bearding on their throats. But they all generally look pretty similar. They're not really really beautifully colored songbirds, and they are songbirds. Even though we don't necessarily think of them as being great at singing. But so I guess they don't necessarily get the adoration sometimes that a lot of other birds get, right? They're a little more subdued. But if we look a little closer, there's a lot to be fascinated about when we're studying crows. Um, Crows have played a big role in a lot of cultures, not just our current society, but crows have been well known to be kind of unusual among birds. They've been viewed as alternately wise and mysterious and mischievous and kind of tricksters by different cultures. In that picture up there on the left, you see we've got that's from Norse mythology. That's Odin. And he would have two ravens. Okay, ravens are also in that corvid family, and those two ravens were named Hugin and Munin, and they would fly around the world and watch everything that was happening, and then report back to Odin and give him the lowdown on everything that was going on in the world around him. On the right there, you see a that is the raven as it's depicted by the Tlingit and the Haida people of Alaska. It's the raven there is considered it's revered as this kind of like trickster god who does all sorts of things from putting the sun in the sky to meddling in the affairs of people. So they're really important figures to a lot of different cultures, and they've always kind of had an interesting place in people's minds and hearts. Here in the U.S., we kind of, I guess, think of them as maybe being a little more suspicious. If you've ever seen the classic film The Birds, they weren't portrayed in a great light there. But of course, that's a scary movie, so that's a different story. But birds have always these crows and ravens have always been noticed for their intelligence, and even dating back all the way to Aesop's fables, the story of the crow and the pitcher. You can see this is a little bit of art depicting that story, but basically it was a crow trying to drink from a pitcher, realized that the water level was not high enough. So, one by one, the crow would drop pebbles into the pitcher and gradually displace the water so it rose to a point where he could drink. And the moral of that story was kind of using your wits to get by in the world around you, and crows certainly do that. Now, what's interesting is that fable of the crow and the pitcher is very much rooted in reality. The crows have been observed to understand that causal relationship between dropping weight into water and displacing that water. This is a video where a group of researchers from New Zealand kind of captured that by giving this bird a test where they have two treats in two different beakers, right? The one on the left obviously contains water. The treat is floating on top of water. The other one contains sand. And the crow definitely knows dropping rocks into sand isn't going to do anything. That's not going to help the situation at all. But it does realize that it can move the level of water in the other beaker. So we see it picking up some of the stones, dropping them in. Testing to see if he's got it quite there. Needs to do a little more work, it looks like. Keeps going, keeps dropping a few in. And little by little he's getting closer and closer to it until he's able to actually snatch it out of there. So it's pretty impressive problem solving, and we'll talk a little bit more about how crows are able to solve problems in their environment. But what's interesting is the reason probably that we have so many different stories about crows, and the reason that they're so frequently depicted in all these different cultures, is because they're a little different than most animals. They're what we call synanthropes. So if you think about what that word means, right? Anthropology, right, is the study of people and their history. So animals that are synanthropes are animals that tend to seek out people or get along really well in human settlements, humans, with the ways that we've impacted the environments. There's a lot of other animals that do this, right? A lot of the other animals that we see that are thriving in our towns and cities, right? Everything from raccoons to possums to coyotes could be considered synanthropes as well, because they kind of gravitate towards human activity. And crows are no different. They benefit a lot from the kinds of things that we do in our neighborhoods, in our cities. It's beneficial to their lifestyle. And maybe there's no better evidence of that.
So the crows have devised a better way.
In this video from Japan, these are Japanese crows.
Drop it among the traffic.
That's David Attenborough narrating. How these crows in Japan have been well documented to drop hard-shelled nuts.
The problem now is collecting the bits without getting run over.
And using cars to help crack the nuts. And they've also kind of
So some birds have refined their technique.
To get at
they station themselves beside pedestrian crossings.
To get at the snack that's left behind by going to the pedestrian crosswalks.
Wait for the lights to stop the traffic. Then collect your cracked nut in safety.
So this is a behavior seen, like I said, amongst crows in Japan. There's been some limited observations of similar things with American crows as well. But what this illustrates is a great capacity for learning. So it's very interesting to see that.
So the
all right, talking a little bit more about the American crow and their brain, right? So there's some other things that help make them successful about their physiology, right? They've got they're kind of an ultimate generalist, right? Their bill lets them do a lot of different things. They're not really locked into any one specific source of food, like some other birds that might be really well adapted, like a hummingbird, right? And only really consume certain kinds of foods easily. Okay, but their bill makes them an absolute generalist, which helps them thrive in a lot of different environments, especially towns and cities. And their brain is it's interesting because bird brains are organized a little bit more similarly to ours than we might think, right? They're a little bit closer to mammalian brains than they are to reptile brains, for sure. If we look, you can see some of these regions of the brain are pretty similar to how they're laid out in ours, right? If we go to this slide, we can see there's a big difference between the not only the relative size but the organization of between birds and reptiles, right? That's not to say that reptiles, they're not to say that they're not intelligent in their own way, right? They obviously exploit their environment very well and survive in different ways. But birds have a lot more capacity for some different kinds of abilities, right? We see that huge cerebral hemisphere, right? It looks a little bit like our own brain in a lot of ways. You can see here that those regions, okay, between a songbird brain and between the human brain are there. You have some anatomical similarity. Obviously, the human brain has a much larger cerebrum. You've got a lot of these deep folds and everything that help to contain more neurons, right? You've got a lot more surface area in the human brain that allows for all sorts of complicated behaviors. But in general, these two are a little more similar than we think. Okay, so let's look at some ways that this capacity for unique behaviors manifests itself, right? One way is you've got a lot of interesting problem solving by crows. That bird you see there is a New Caledonian crow, and they are really well known for their ability to use tools. Tool use has been observed in a lot of different crow species all over the world to different extents, but the New Caledonian crow is they're kind of the expert at it. They usually they use sticks and other things to find insects and other prey. Let's take a look. This is one New Caledonian crow that was studied extensively, named Betty, and they did a lot of tests on her that are pretty fascinating. And this video is in German, so I'm going to help kind of explain what's going on. But let's take a look at what Betty is able to do here. So in this particular test, the person is going, the researcher is giving her a challenge, right? There's a little tiny, it's like a little thimble that's filled with some meat scraps and fat. So it's a really good treat for a crow. And as you can see, it's in the middle of a plastic tube. So she has to use the stick they've provided to work it out. So on the first trial, they make it kind of easy for her, right? They just put it in the tube, she's able to use the stick and scoot the thimble right out of there. No problem. Then they start making things a little more complicated for her. So on the second trial, what we're going to see is they are going to put this on the opposite side, okay, of the tube. So she'll have to move it across that middle section. You can see it drops right there. There's a little bit of a trap for that thimble to fall into. So if she doesn't do it just right, it could be a problem getting it out. We see on the second trial, she again grabs that stick, starts probing, and whoops, doesn't quite make it across, right? So Betty has failed this second trial, but you see she's being very observant. She's taking a close look at this, because she's going to take another swing at it here in just a second.
oder ganz schräg.
It's really interesting to watch how carefully she's kind of assessing the situation.
Aber so können wir Betty nicht verlassen.
So for the third trial,
Wiederum die schwierige
you're going to add the worms again on the far side of the tube, give her the stick, and we'll see what happens.
Wir sind gespannt. Doch Betty scheint nichts dazugelernt zu haben. Alles wie gehabt. Dieselbe Seite, dieselbe Technik.
So this time Betty tries a little bit different technique.
Aber
So we can see her pushing the thimble to the side of the tube and then scooting it along so it narrowly avoids the trap. So that's some really fascinating trial and error that she's doing there. That's a good learning behavior, right? I mean, we do the same thing. We try things, we mess up, and then we engineer a different solution. All right, this is another unusual
Alex bestückt ein kleines Eimerchen mit Krähenlecker.
Betty here as well, because not only do these New Caledonian crows show the ability to use tools, they also show the ability to modify tools as well, which is something that researchers previously thought was a behavior that was really limited to primates. Okay, not something that was really observed in the bird world, certainly. So here she's got a little basket kind of at the bottom of that tube, and they give her a straight piece of wire. So she'll she'll try to get at that basket with the straight wire first. It's not terribly successful.
Ganz offensichtlich.
She's able to manipulate it a little bit.
Betty muss sich etwas einfallen lassen und sie tut es. Blitzschnell krümmt sie das Ende des Drahts und hat einen Haken konstruiert. Das perfekte.
So what we saw there is she used the tape to help bend that wire into a hook. And then she was able to easily pull the basket out by the loop. So that is assessing the situation, realizing the tool you have isn't adequate, and then making some changes. So that shows, again, some really impressive intelligence on the part of this bird. Really fascinating that she's able to do that.
Alex bestückt ein.
So why are these birds so smart in the first place? It may have something to do with the fact that crows are very social, right? They have a lot of social relationships in their life. They maintain some intricate social connections with the other birds. By the time that they've reached about age 4 or so, it's very likely that they have located a partner that they will remain with for their life. Okay, so the crows are what we call socially monogamous animals. It doesn't mean that they necessarily father. Or that they don't necessarily have all their offspring with the same mate, but they will spend the majority of their time and protect the same territory with the same mate over the course of a lifetime. So they are socially monogamous. They also roost in communal groups. So they seek out other groups of other crows, typically crows that they're related to, that they should have a familial relationship to, and some that they don't, but they all kind of share these large group roosts together to kind of have strength in numbers and protect their territory together, especially while they're sleeping. So they maintain relationships with birds that they're related to and birds that they've kind of selected as their partner over the course of years and years. And maintaining social relationships like that, it really does require a lot of brain power to recognize all the little quirks and slights and emotional differences that happen, all of those little behaviors that animals display. So keeping track of all that takes a lot of brain power. And so that was probably a driver in the evolution of this kind of this intelligence that we see with crows. We see that with a lot of other really smart animals as well, from great apes to dolphins to to us as well, right? We're very social creatures. So here's some interesting studies on how one of the benefits that they get from being so social, right? One of those main benefits is that they are able to share information, right? So we've seen crows learning by trial and error. We've seen crows figuring things out for themselves, but they also they don't hold on to that information if it's going to benefit the group. So they kind of help to share that information with others. We see, okay, this is a researcher who did a lot of research on this, named Kaylee Swift, and what she did is took part in this study that's still going on about crow facial recognition. Okay, this is kind of a famous study, so you may have heard of it before, you may have not. But what essentially they did is they went to parks in their area and they trapped a certain number of crows. Okay, so which was kind of a stressful event for the crow, obviously to be trapped and banded so they could recognize it later. And while they did that, they wore specific masks. Okay, those Halloween masks you see in the corner there, they're very creepy looking, very strange. But the reason they did that was because they wanted to see if those crows would recognize the people who were their captors later on. And this is another researcher on that experiment. He's going to kind of show us how that works.
Really, to me, the most surprising thing about crows so far has been their ability to recognize and remember particular people, and even just particular faces.
This is Freeway Park, and it's an area where we've had crows banded for about 8 years now. And we caught them just recently, this past year again, with wearing a particular mask. So what we expect, if we were wearing masks now, we should have birds scolding us even by this point. When we put our masks on, I think you'll see a dramatically different response to the birds than certainly we're seeing right now.
When we've done these experiments where we've had all different sorts of people wear the same face and see these crows respond so strongly and pass on this knowledge to others in their society, that's been really surprising to me. I always knew they were smart. I always knew they could learn from trial and error because they're tough to catch a second time. But to see them really be paying such close attention to us has been really eye-opening for me.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. They do study us pretty carefully, it turns out. And what's really amazing about this experiment is that they didn't just do it for a few years, okay? They've continuously done this experiment for about 14 years now, where they're putting on those same masks and entering that park, right? Because like we said, those crows try to maintain the same territory for a long period of time, right? If you see a pair of crows in your neighborhood, year after year, it's very likely that they're the same crows you keep seeing, right? If you have two crows in your neighborhood, it's probably the same crows over and over again that you're seeing. They try to maintain that territory. Now, in the 14 years that they've done this, they're finding that every time they put on the masks, they keep getting that really stressed, aggravated response from the birds when they come through the park like that. And it's not even the original birds that they trapped and banded either. So they're basically passing along that information from bird to bird, and so that birds that weren't even initially involved in the experiment now know to recognize those individuals as being bad news. It's really fascinating, and probably a good reason not to be mean to any crows you might have around your house, because they might not forget you. And of course, another odd behavior that some other has been observed recently with crows is the habit of having crow funerals. Okay, now a crow funeral, what does that mean? It's this behavior where when a crow finds another member of its species dead, it kind of stands and does this alarm call to the rest. And kind of spreads this alarm call from bird to bird throughout their area until you get crows flocking together. And then they'll flock together around the dead bird for a little while and then disperse. So why do they do that? That's another, the research has shown that that's another indication of information sharing, okay? So what they're doing is when they find a dead bird, they call to the rest. They kind of bring any crows in the area together and then kind of observe the environment a little bit, so that they will have an association of that place where the crow died as being potentially dangerous, right? They wouldn't want any of the other birds to fall into the same fate that the dead bird did. So they're kind of gathering together, doing a little bit of reconnaissance on the area, and then basically letting other birds in the area know that this could potentially be a dangerous place. The way they research that is really interesting. Those same researchers that did the mask experiment did some of this as well. And basically they would be bringing these, they would be feeding crows normally, seeing how they responded, timing them to see how quickly they would come and take food from the researchers. Then they would leave a dead crow out, right? A crow that looked visibly dead. You can see that one there is like, it looks like it's taxidermied. And then they would come back after the crows communicated, after they had this crow funeral, this gathering, and then they would come back and feed them a second time, and they found that the crows were much more hesitant to approach the second time after having seen the dead crow in that area. So there was some definite wariness associated with that place after a dead crow was found. So another indication or another example of some really fascinating information sharing happening among crow species. So that's all I've got for you today. It's just they're such an amazing group of animals to study, and like I said, one of my favorite birds. So absolutely, I encourage you to go and share some of your crow stories in the comments, or ask any questions if you like. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week. I hope everybody's staying safe. Thanks for watching.